It was me. I'm muted. I did it again. See, it's been a long time, Chris. We're gonna roll that back for those of you that are like, what is this guy talking about? Chris Orwig back, Sony Artisan of Imagery, part 2 of our Capturing Authentic Portraits series presented to you by Sony. Chris, welcome. What's going on, man?
Hey, Derek, so good to be here. So good to get a chance to chat again. So I'm excited about this one.
Definitely excited to have you back. I know last time we had you over there right outside the Christmas market in Germany. Looks like you're stateside with us now.
Yes, I'm in California in Santa Barbara. I have this little backyard cabin, my happy place, and yeah. So hopefully our connection will be better, and I'm glad we get to kind of. It was fun to connect actually on location, in the midst of like a shoot. It was sort of dramatic, but it's nice to be home too.
The connection is all there. You still dropped a ton of gems for us last time. For those that didn't tune in, we're going to get the link for that so you guys can watch part 1. I also want to send a special thank you and welcome to everybody joining us from YouTube. We're streaming live on YouTube right now. So in addition to live stream, Vimeo, Facebook, and everybody right here on Zoom, welcome to those of you on YouTube. And I'll remind you guys, if you do have any questions, make sure you get them dropped into the comment section there. But I'm going to turn it over to Chris. Again, we're talking about authentic portraits, how to capture them. So don't hesitate, get your questions in. Chris, take it away.
Okay, thanks, Derek, and welcome everyone. And this is going to be really fun. And the whole goal here is to give you some ideas on how you can capture better portraits. So what I'm going to do is show some slides, but then I'm going to jump out of the slides 3 or 4 times in order to have kind of some face-to-face talking as well. So let me start by sharing my screen here, and then I'll go to my slide deck. And then if you can give me the verbal or visual thumbs up, if we can see that and everything.
We are good.
Okay, so this is part 2. And this is all about authentic portraits. And the reason it's part 2 is to kind of build upon some of the other things that we talked about. First, a little bit about myself. Just one slide. I'm a photographer, author, and teacher, in case you don't know me. My most recent book is Authentic Portraits, and I'm a Sony Artisan of Imagery. I've created a lot of online training, and a huge thanks to Sony and B&H for putting this together. So thanks, you guys. Awesome. I'll give this link at the end, but I have some discounts and stuff on training and resources if you want that. So screenshot that if you're interested. And I want to jump right into the topics I'm going to be covering today. There are 5 of them. You guys ready for it? First one is, how do we build bridges with our models and subjects? So that's number 1. In this photo, I had to do this in the water, which is actually kind of challenging, but we'll talk about it in water, on land, in the air, wherever. The next one is, how do we evoke emotion? How do we create images which have feeling and depth and they're soulful and all that? Number 3 is, how do we pose our subjects better and do so in a natural and authentic way so that it looks really warm and inviting and natural and all those things. Number 4, the 4th topic is, how do you get new clients and how do you keep them? Because it's not enough in this day and age just to get a client, because they can easily jump to someone else. There's so many photographers out there. And so we'll talk a little bit about that. And then, because I am a teacher, I wanted to share a few little mini assignments for you for how you can build some skills, build your portfolio, and really put into practice some of the things that we're talking about. So let's go back to the first topic, which is building bridges. For me, I am always thinking about, how do I connect with people, whether in this case it's strangers or a celebrity on the right, or a famous model on the left, or I'm doing a lookbook shoot or photographing an athlete. And so I have these 6 ideas for you here. Again, if you're kind of a note taker or you like doing screenshots, this would be the moment to take notes or to have the screenshot, because what I'm going to do is stop sharing my screen for a second, and I want to talk through these, because I think these kind of topics work better face to face. So go ahead and stop sharing that. And hopefully, Derek, you can see me, and
Yes.
my volume's okay and everything. So how do we build bridges? So the first little tip that I have here is really thinking about your energy and presence. And sometimes what can happen is we can be, I don't know, distracted because we packed our gear or we forgot something or we're worried about something, and we bring that energy to a shoot, and it shows up on our subjects' faces, in their countenance, in their posture. And so really thinking about recentering your own energy. Kind of, for me, what that looks like, let's say one of those photos I think I just showed was captured on this New York City streets, right? And so I was just was trying to get somewhere. I was in a hurry, and then I took a breath, kind of recenter myself, and then connected with the person and made the photo. So really thinking about your own energy, and maybe just to reflect that. If I'm frustrated and I bring that frustration to my talk, then I'm going to talk really frustrated about building bridges. But if I'm kind of calm and mellow and relaxed, then that's going to affect even how I'm teaching or how I'm communicating. So building bridges starts with you, starts with your own energy. Second one is really paying attention to nonverbal cues. So one of the things I've started to study throughout my career is how people react to the camera and how they react to being on camera. And we have all heard the idea of like deer in headlights. You hold up a camera and some people freeze. So freezing is something people do. Tension's another one in the shoulders. We carry our tension in different places, between our eyes, of course, furrowing brows. But then there's this involuntary behaviors that happen, like if the eyelid flutters, lower eyelid in particular, either one, there's this nervousness or this sense of like a little bit of loss of control. So anyway, so I'm looking for all these. I'm looking for the rate of breathing. I'm looking for how people are moving their hands. I'm looking for any signs of nervousness. I'm really cued into nonverbal cues. And that would be the same way that you would be cued into maybe nonverbal cues. I think of this often with an animal. So if you see a dog and it looks friendly and it's giving you cues that it's friendly, you could go up and maybe say, hey, can I, someone's walking the dog, can I pet your dog? Or I teach my kids that, ask before you just go in and try to pet the dog. But if the dog is drooling and, agitated, you wouldn't walk up to it. So you're just kind of trying to cue into what's going on with this person non-verbally, because what they're saying isn't always what they're feeling. So for example, I was once photographing this really beautiful, stunning model, and she looked amazing. And I was talking to her about, could I capture a portrait of her? And she said yes. And you could tell it was a little bit of a concerted effort to say yes, but then she put on the look on her face. But meanwhile, her hands, I can't really show you that, but were down lower and they were clenched into fists. And it was obviously a nonverbal of like, hey, this is like a defensive posture. It was not relaxed. And so, of course, what I did say, hey, I asked her another question, and then I just said, maybe relax your shoulders, open your hands and close them. And I asked her something about her own life. We'll talk about that later. But that nonverbal cue, although it was really obvious, is often overlooked. And I know this from my workshops and stuff, because as photographers, we're focused on the eyes, right? But we got to kind of take in the whole person. Another nonverbal cue to think about is your feet. You point your feet towards people that you trust and like. And so even if you're sitting and where their feet are pointing, so there's all these things, and there's ways you can study this. There's a lot of resources out there. I could talk about those later, but let me jump to my next topic. And that is this idea of building trust with mirroring. So as you're picking up on their nonverbal cues, the energy you're bringing, hopefully you're kind of seeing what their energy is, and then you reflect that back. So if you say, hey, how's your day? And they say, well, my day is okay. How's yours? Then I might say, mine's pretty good as well. And that was mirroring. I basically responded the same length and duration, the same rhythm, and the same amount of information. I didn't say, well, my day started at 5:45 when I went up and I was just feeling so powerhouse. I did this huge workout. And then after that, I had this smoothie, and in my smoothie, I had chia seeds and hemp. They're just like, this, we're not connecting. But if I said, how's your day? And they said, oh my gosh, my day started at 5:45. I did this yoga session with my favorite teacher. And then afterwards, I'm doing this juice cleanse and the blah, blah, blah. How was yours? That gives me kind of permission to mirror that back to them. And that really builds a sense of trust. Like, hey, we're literally, in sync and all of that. It also is important to do that non-verbally as well. So that's number 3. So far, your own energy and presence. Second one, nonverbal cues. Third one, mirror their behavior. And rhythm and all those things. And then the fourth one is questions. And the art of portraiture for me is distilled down to a few core things. And one of them is questions. Every good portrait I've ever taken is a result of a question. And that question can be as simple, like Derek and I were talking earlier, and I saw one of his tattoos. And I just said, hey, what's the story with your tattoo? I love tattoos. I love hearing about tattoos. So if I see a tattoo, I ask about it. Sometimes they say, oh, I was drunk and I don't know, it's horrible. And it's like, fine. Other times it goes somewhere else. So if they are not ready to respond to that, that's okay. Roll with it and find something else to talk about. Like if they're like, oh, it's just something I did, doesn't matter. And say, okay, cool. So you live in this area. What do you like about it? Oh, I hate it. This is the worst area. I can't believe I live in Soho. I want to get out to Brooklyn or wherever. I'm making this up. Say, well, what is it about Brooklyn you like? Oh man, I love. And then they light up. They lean forward. And so I'm dialoguing. And then what you have to really do is think back to the mirroring. So you're actively listening. This is my next tip. Nodding. Yes. Wait, tell me about that a little bit more. You're getting, you're in that mode, and then you dialogue. So if I ask them to say, what do they like about Brooklyn? They finish talking and say, well, what do you like? And I say, it's nice. Then all of a sudden we disconnected. So you have to be willing to not have them completely in the spotlight. This is especially true with celebrities. They don't like hearing themselves speak. They have enough of that. They have enough attention and focus put on them. But if they say, well, this is what I like about Brooklyn, what do you like about it? I say, oh man, I've done some, the street photography there. There's this one wall. Do you know that wall in this street, and this one coffee shop, and this book? And I'm kind of contributing to the conversation that creates connection, just like it would with friends, right? You don't want it too lopsided or too one-sided. Now, in other situations, though, just to jump, to contradict that, sometimes people need to vent or they need to talk. We were talking before this went live, and someone was talking about a red light, getting caught on one of those red light cameras. If the subject just had gotten a ticket with a red light camera and they know it, they are probably so flustered, so frustrated, they're going to need to just vent, and they don't need me to tell my red light story, right? So you're obviously kind of gauging the cues, but what you want to keep in mind is that you want it to be where there's not so much focus on them that it becomes a performance. You want it to be more dialogue, more shoulder to shoulder, more collaborative. So that's that little thing. And then the last one is just this idea, kind of reiterating reciprocation, which is creating a circular flow. So in the photo shoots, what I like to do is to think of the flow or the rhythm of the connection is really like a circle, and that you're generating energy through that versus well, like Derek, you and I, last time we did this, I had been photographing astronauts, and I asked one of the lead astronauts who spent all this time outside of a spaceship doing EVA time, extra vehicular activity, so basically spacewalking and fixing things. And so I said, I'm like, Mike, what's it like to do an EVA? He was like, I can't even respond to that. And I was like, shoot, damn it. And basically I realized that I asked him the question that he gets asked too frequently, and I didn't set it up. I didn't tee it up right. And I didn't give him enough space to be able to respond. Does that make sense? So maybe it's like asking the celebrity, let's just say, I'm going to go with one, Kelly Slater, world champion surfer. Like, well, what was it like to win your 10th world title? And he's just like, good. I mean, there's not enough texture, there's not enough layer, there's not enough rhythm, there's not enough circular energy. What you'd have to ask rather, it's like, Kelly, so you've won a lot, you've lost a lot. Like, that's kind of interesting. You've been going at this for a long time. Is there any like world title thing that maybe stands out to you more than the others? And he would be like, oh yeah, man, my 6th. Oh my gosh, like that one, it was like this fight with this one guy, and then we have something to talk about. So just thinking about how do you ask questions that generate energy versus that kind of like run into that wall and stop it. And if you do run into the wall and stop it, like what happened with the astronaut, he said, I can't even answer it. I'm like, fair enough. That is kind of, that question's kind of, I can imagine that's kind of impossible to answer. And then I just bounced to something else that was easier to answer. If it's not an astronaut, it might be something that's like, well, what's the tattoo? Oh, that's a long story, which means they shake their head. They just told you, I don't want to tell you. So you say, oh, got it. So obviously you like to travel. What are places you like to go? It's like, oh, for me, like once, the next place I want to go is here. Travel is easy to talk about, or find some other easy topic to talk about. All right, well, there you have it. That's kind of part number 1, or not part 1, like little section number 1. Derek, let's jam, let's talk. Any questions, any reiteration? If anyone else has a question out there, great. If not, too, I can just jump to the next section as well.
So obviously, Chris, you've talked about you shoot a lot of celebrities, known people. Now, sometimes you don't have all the time in the world to build that
Right.
rapport. Sometimes you might have what, a minute, 2 minutes, you're in and out.
Yes.
How does it work? What's the 2 minute drill version of that? I mean, is there one, or is it just kind of like a crash course?
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's a really, really good thing because there some of my best portraits have taken place in 30 seconds, one shot, two shot, which is kind of funny. I guess it's funny because sometimes I think like, shouldn't I have to work harder to do this? But I realize it is like it's condensing it down and kind of just doing all that I was saying in a really short amount of time. So how do we do that? I think of this back to a friend of mine who shoots for National Geographic when I was just starting photography. And he said, Chris, here's kind of the secret to photography. He said, if I'm on assignment to photograph San Francisco for the Geographic, day one, I shoot the postcard shots. Day two, I do the work of a photographer. And then, of course, I said, well, what if you don't have 2 days? And he's like, well, the first half of the day, do the obvious shots, second half, work. What if you only have 2 minutes? First minute, obvious shot, second minute, do the work. And so what that means to me as a portrait photographer is the obvious shot is that you're excited to be in someone's presence. There's something interesting, amazing, fascinating, maybe moving, sad, who knows what about this person that you're drawn to connect with, or to work with. There's some like reason for that. And what I've seen with my students is the more beautiful, handsome, interesting, amazing the person is, or more emotional connection, the worse the photography, because they're only doing the first half of the job, which is amazing person A, take the picture, which isn't the work of a photographer. The work of a photographer is to emotionally respond, wow, Golden Gate Bridge, wow, person. And then it's to kind of drop in and say, what is it beneath the surface, which really is more interesting than the exterior. And so how I do that when there's a short amount of time, or how I encourage people to do that, is it's kind of a delicate thing, because you can't say like, well, tell me your deepest, darkest secret in 30 seconds, and then I'll take a deep, soulful picture. but what you do is you have your camera out on the ready. My energy is very non-rushed, even though I'm with this huge celebrity, 30 seconds of time, I'm thinking, oh my gosh, oh my gosh, oh my gosh. I'm like, okay, Chris, don't go there. And just say, hey, honor to meet you. I appreciate this about you. This portrait I'm trying to achieve is one which is a little bit more of a character portrait, a little less commercial. Here's one shot. So you get the one shot out of the way. If you only have two shots. Okay, so that was great. Maybe just roll your shoulders, take a little breath, look back at the camera. Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. So that all of that happened where I'm observing how they're holding tension. I'm observing how they're responding to me. My energy is hopefully setting a mood that, hey, this is going to be okay. And this is, we're kind of going down a notch, versus like, okay, hey, here we go. And other portrait photographers do this, which is fine. Here we go. This is a big moment. All right, do this, chin out. I'll do that look. All right, right there. Boom. Got it. If that's the kind of image you want, then of course, bring that kind of energy to the shoot. And I think the best portrait photographers have photographs which really match and mirror who they are and their own energy. And so all of that is to say, this is a real long answer, Derek, but hopefully helpful, is to be yourself. The more authentic you are, the more authentic response you get. What I've seen happen to some of my students is them trying to impersonate me, or impersonate some other teacher or some other photographer. And it can help them realize like, oh, that worked or that didn't work, but usually it kind of fails in the long run. But when they kind of finally find their own voice, how they like to hold the camera, what focal length they like to use, how far they want to stand away, how close, what do they want to say to the person. And even the closeness isn't just focal length. It's like some people, like for me, I like to work pretty close, 85 millimeter lens. So that means like an arm length and a half. So, I mean, what distance is that? Maybe like 5 or 6 feet away from them. So it's talking distance. I don't like to have to raise my voice. So that's for that reason, I don't shoot with the 70 to 200 a lot, because I'm too far back and I'm having to say, oh, hey, that's great. Tell me about that tattoo. I want to say like, whoa, tell me about that tattoo. So it's a little more like that. I will step back and come forward. But anyway, once you find all that all comes together, then what I've seen with my students is they create this profound work. And then they'll come back to me and say, yeah, and Chris, it was kind of easy. And I'm like, exactly, because you're aligned. if it is so much of a fight that you just feel kind of wrecked afterwards, or you feel like you kind of forced someone to do something that didn't feel right to you, pay attention to that. That gut instinct is really, really valuable in helping you shape a body of work. Because one image, like I can create a high energy, exciting, strong, whatever picture, but I don't want to create that as my body of work, if that makes sense. So what I encourage people to do is to sort of find their own jam. That was a long answer, Derek, but
Dude,
but
I will
hopefully.
never complain. We're sitting here holding on to every
Okay, okay.
word.
Yeah, yeah.
Now, we do have a natural follow up to that. Jeff, who's joining us on Zoom, is asking, when are you shooting the portraits? Is it while conversing or is it after?
Yes, Jeff, thank you, thank you. That's an amazing question. It is right away, really quick. I do that early photo, so I want to make sure that happens within. Let's say if I have 2 minutes, it happens within the first 30 seconds. If I have 2 hours, it happens within the first 2 minutes. So I take the picture really, really quick, almost like too quick. And the reason is I need to get that out of my system. I need to create that. Remember, I'm kind of into this cycle of energy kind of thing. I want to create that is, oh, this is something that's happening. Versus what I've seen my students do is talk, 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 connect, and they're all close. And then all of a sudden pull the camera out and it's like, whoa. And then it's a different energy. So what I would do is I would say like, oh, tell me about that tattoo. Wait, the light's really good right here. Okay, wait. So yeah, that tattoo, that picture I'll throw away. That's really interesting. I'm like, wow. So it seems like that's your mom's handwriting who is a famous writer. I don't know what, like, wow, like you were really close with her. Yeah, I'm really close with her. Okay, well, let's do this. Close your eyes, think about your mom and how she's passed on some, something to you, and then, and how she cares about you. Then think about her care and love, close your eyes, look back at the camera, and I take the second picture, and then I could be done. Like that could be it. If I had more time, I would bring that out. But I think, Jeff, your question is really helpful to think in the short answer is integrate it into the process, and don't be concerned about interrupting them as long as you bring it back to that. So wait, that tattoo, great. Wait, let me take that. Okay, now tell me about it. What a lot of my students do is they say that tattoo, great. What? And then they're like, oh wait, move over here, move over here. And then the person's like, but I never told you about my tattoo. Like, come on, like this, I thought this was about me, not you. So you need to that's where you need to do the dialogue. You need to follow up. You need to connect. You need to check in on their energy. Or you need to be like, if you take that first picture and they're like, oh my gosh, I get so nervous with having my photo taken. Like, oh man, I do too. The trick is just to be you, and you look great, and that whatever, this environment's awesome. And tell me about that tattoo again. And then you roll with it that way. If that makes sense. Real natural flow.
Perfect. I love it.
Yeah. Should we dive to the next topic?
Let's
Keep
dive
this
in.
keep this party going. Here we go. Sharing screen, and I'll just relaunch my deck here. And onto Evoking Emotion. And I have a couple images, and then I'll jump out of these to share some thoughts. This is Kelly Slater, world champion surfer. Two separate models, but I'm trying to photograph models not as models, as humans. Again, these are more lifestyle shoots, but I'm trying to get character portraits while I'm doing those. This is a baseball player. And I love the connection of all those pictures. This is a well-known artist, and you can see there's some kind of underlying emotion in all of these pictures, regardless of the subject matter, regardless of how I'm connecting those or how I'm creating those. So I have 3 ideas for evoking emotion in your portraits, if that's something you're interested in doing. And here they are. So screenshot or take little notes. I'm going to jump out of the deck here and just talk about how we can do that. And the first one is this idea that this begets that. And it's something you'll hear a lot, that vulnerability begets vulnerability. Kindness begets kindness. Gratitude begets gratitude. And so what you want to do is, if there is some kind of emotion that you're searching for, is really thinking about how you need to, in a way, kind of, and this goes back even to the beginning of connecting, but you need to figure out a way to get there with them. So let's say, for example, I'll go to one with the Kelly Slater one. He's this famous surfer guy. For me, he's one of my heroes. I'm a surfer. It was, I've admired him forever. I was really excited to connect with him. And all of that. So I had a decision. I could either photograph him as the idea, the icon, the celebrity, the hero in his little realm, or as a human. And so I needed to talk to him. And in talking to him, we got to this conversation about identity. It had nothing to do with surfing. It had to do with identity and growing up and age and all these interesting things. And at one point he said, Chris, I'm embarrassed to admit that for much of my life, I confused the idea of Kelly Slater with the person of Kelly Slater. And we only got to that emotional moment because I was able to talk about my own struggle with identity. I was able to kind of have a conversation. Then in midst of that conversation, when you look at those photos, you can see that struggle. And if I were to jump back to that, you can see that struggle, but it doesn't even really matter because with some of these teaching things, this isn't so much about me, it's about you guys watching and listening and thinking and connecting the dots, which is about the idea that you create that context, that environment, this begets that. So vulnerability came from me being vulnerable, not like, hey, Kelly, I want to be really vulnerable about how I'm insecure and are you insecure? That doesn't work. It's a real natural flow, conversational, then meaningful portrait. So that's the first thing. The second thing is thinking about this idea of having a narrative or story in your photographs. So I once heard someone say the difference between narrative and plot is that plot is like, or storyline is like the king died or the queen died, the king died. But narrative is the queen died and the king died of heartbreak. It's just a little more detail, a little bit more, which you're like, oh, versus like two people died, huh? You're like, oh, he died, he was brokenhearted death. That's a different story. And so thinking about narrative and bringing that into your photos, what I'll do is often ask questions. So let's say the last picture there, or let's say the artist, there's an artist one where he's kind of looking up. I'm a little higher than him. So whenever you have someone look up, that's a vulnerable posture. They're looking towards the camera and the camera's looking down, not too much because I don't want to be like imposing, but just a little bit of that. He was talking about his struggles with alcohol and drug abuse and how long he had been sober, mistakes he had made, and how his art had really saved his life. And so when he got to that point, that narrative, I said, okay, let's go there for a second if you're up for that, and how this art has given you something to move towards. And he's like, yeah, man. And he closed his eyes. I have people close their eyes a lot. And then he took a little breath, looked up at me, and it's like this boom. And I'm like, okay, I'm done. I know, that was this gift from him. So, and that's thinking about the story, which I'm not creating like, well, hey man, imagine that if you were, sad about something, think about that. Or if you were an archaeologist and found something, and I know some people use that method and that's fine, I think for them, but not for me. For me, I want the narrative to be true to their own story. It can be also simple if you're like, okay, what do I ask them? I'll often say like, hey, you're really accomplished, but you're also really grounded. How is it that you're so grounded? How is it you're so down to earth? And they'll usually say, oh, my mom, she always taught me, or my dad, or I'll look for something where they smile a little bit. And I'll say, close your eyes, think about that person, or think about an obstacle you faced and overcame it, or think about a friend that helped you overcome that. And then look back to the camera, and that energy of that moment, the narrative is in there. And the narrative I'm searching for is like a phrase, which is the king died of heartbreak. It's all I need. I don't want the king died of heartbreak, and then because he broke his ankle and then he tripped down the stairs and then the jester did this and then something else happened, then his horse died and then that's too much narrative for my images. And I know some people create those, and I admire a lot of those photographers. There's all this story in the frame. My story is like a phrase. And that's what I think also gives people access to the photos, because they're like, I know something's there. I don't know what it is. It's not like an outfit. It's not a prop, but it feels soulful. It feels emotive. It feels, real. And so that's how I get that narrative and plot. So that's a little thought there. And then the last little tip on this one is to think about the emotional ebb and flow. If you and I were hanging out at a coffee shop and we were talking about something amazing or something tragic or something frightening, whatever it is, the conversation would have this ebb and flow. It would be like a tide. It would come in and get to a point, and then it would also dissipate off. And maybe thinking about that, I'll think about this is really tragic, but one of my daughter's friends, they had to put their dog to sleep recently, and she's a fifth grader, and it was so sad for her. So in her sharing her sadness with us, it was like she was like really choked up, and then I'm not taking pictures, by the way. I'm just talking about human experience here. She got choked up and then she cried, but then she released that, and then she just wanted to goof around and play. And the kids were playing games and having fun. And that happens on a smaller scale in photo shoots where you have the connection moment and then you have to let it go. Some photographers I see try to cling onto that too hard or dig too deep into something, and then it just sort of falls apart, and it kind of creates almost a betrayal with the subject. Like, were you just doing that to get emotion? And so you want to be careful with that and just say, hey, there's a little ebb and flow. And if there's no emotional connection right now, that's fine. Let's just, let's say with Kelly Slater, it's not like instantly being vulnerable, but just, hey, this is happening. And then he shared that. And then after that picture, I'm like, hey, thank you. It's like, yeah. And then we talked about surfboards or something stupid, and let it go. And that sort of honors the moment as well. All right, that's the end of part 2. Derek, any thoughts? And I guess I'm laughing because it's kind of funny because I don't know if this is resonating, or I don't know if there are follow-up thoughts or questions, or if I'm just a crazy person or whatnot. But yeah, hit me.
My phone's blowing up over here, man. Everybody's loving it. I'm getting like side messages about the information you're dropping. First question that comes in is whether or not you prepare before, and a follow up to that is based on your answer to the first part. Say you prepare one way for a certain subject, and in
Yeah.
talking to them, you get a completely different vibe. How do you adjust that on the fly?
Yes, I prepare every time, and that goes back to the first part, preparing myself and thinking about it and vision and style. And even like on Friday, so this is a couple days ago, I had a lifestyle shoot, and it was with for a brand, so it's brand shoot and lookbook, and a yoga teacher, model, very stunning person, human inside and out kind of thing. I mean, I don't know all that yet, but you kind of know from a distance. So my preparing was just kind of thinking through that. What I hadn't expected was there was a lot of kind of internal strife that she was going through, so because you kind of think like, oh, it's beautiful lookbook shoot, lifestyle-y, beep boppy, like kind of that's the energy we're going for here. So then needed to create space and pivot for her to vent a little bit, and that goes back to that stoplight thing. And once she vented, then she was like, cool. She accepted me. And I actually asked her about that a little bit. I said something like, I was asking her about kind of her role and all the stuff she does. And she said, it's hard. This may sound funny to some people, but I'm going to say it. She said, it's hard doing what I do. I'm young, and I'm a young, beautiful yoga teacher. And I was like, well, it's hard. Tell me about that. And she's like, well, a lot of people expect certain things from me, which are, and they just kind of look at the surface of who I am versus who I am. And then she was like, and thanks for looking past that, and seeing all of me. And I was like, of course, like that's what this is all about. So, and again, that's kind of here that worked. It doesn't always work, where I pivot and that works. But the point is, yes, I prepare, and then yes, create space, because you don't know what's happened that moment, that day, that year for that person, or what the camera's bringing up. Because people can be really confident in one situation. Even let's say in that last shoot, the model was wearing a black dress, like this vintage, really, really interesting black dress. And she's like, I've never modeled in black before. So she was nervous about that, right? And so then I needed to say, hey, black looks so good in this way, and here's this, and here's how this is, give them that feedback. And so that's the little pivot, micro adjustments. And then sometimes I would say last little thought is being willing to sacrifice the photo. If it's more of a portrait, editorial, narrative-based portrait, story portrait, connection, soulful portrait, there's a time when the person just isn't ready for that portrait to be made. And this has happened to me a lot, say with a close friend, where I'm like, I can tell they're going through something. And you know how I don't know if this happens to anyone out there, but you're like, oh my gosh, I really want to capture report that person. Like, this is it. This is the moment. They're like melancholy. They're dressed cool. The light's cool, but they just do. That's the last thing in the world that's good for where their mental state. And so even though they're dressed perfectly, the environment's perfect, the light's perfect, that's keying back to those nonverbal cues and being like, oh yeah, another time we'll get this. And then whenever I do the another time thing, sometimes you lose it, but often it comes back around. So I'll go to one musician story, Ben Harper, singer songwriter, one of my favorite musicians. I was at an event where he was, they were rehearsing, and people were taking, and I went up to the rehearsal and I said, hey, Ben, is it okay if I shoot? He's like, no. I'm like, 10-4. Other people just went up and started shooting without asking permission. And it made them so mad because rehearsal, they're trying to figure out their moves, their everything. Then after that was over, I said, hey, Ben, I'm doing this project. It's a portrait thing. Could we do this? He's like, yeah, of course. And so because I had let go of photo 1, I got photo 2, which was 100 million times better than photo 1. And so, well, that happens in a lot of different scenarios. Often, even in situations, say with a friend, you're like, hey, can I do this photo? This looks amazing. And they say, you realize, or maybe you don't even ask, and they know you want to do it, but you don't do it. Then maybe half hour, 10 minutes, whatever later, they say, so you really want to take a picture, don't you? I'm like, I think it would be meaningful. They say, let's do it. So not being too greedy, I guess. As photographers, we are often too greedy. Something happens and we take a picture of it because it's visually exciting, but doesn't always mean we should take the picture. So, and this is in portraiture. This isn't in, like, let's say you're on a safari in Africa and something exciting happens, a lion attacks a gazelle or something. Yeah, take the picture if it's speaking to you. But in portraiture, it's a little bit more about the human sensitivity to where they're at, because what you want is a portrait which is a gift from subject, not something taken. So you want collaborative things. And I think if you look at the great portrait photographers, which I do a lot, you can see, you're like, wow, they got something out of that person. But then you realize, no, that's the wrong way to say it. That person gifted them something. There was some magic between the two of, that happened. And if all of this is too woo-woo and too much for some people, you can scale that down to really simple. And just being like, if the moment isn't right, give them a minute. Be like, oh wait, I gotta go grab something out of my bag. Hang on a second. That way they can collect themselves, check their phone, kind of look at themselves. You come back and you take the picture. So what I'm saying is scalable. It's not always famous musicians or big, huge, important shoot or something, but just you can swing this to ways that work for you. Or sometimes it's like, I photograph family and kids. It's like a kid, and you can tell the kid's just kind of annoyed because his mom just told him to sit still. And you can be like, yeah, I don't like to sit still either. Hang on a second, and run away, run back. And then he maybe chases you and be like, she's like, wait, sit still right now. And he's like, okay. And then you get the picture, right? And so again, it's about maintaining connection. And again, it was a long answer, but hopefully it's valuable,
No, of course. I think we need to bottle up your demeanor, Chris. It seems like there's so much that goes on. Like, you're just so like,
Oh,
any situation. I think a lot of it is the fact that you can center yourself and think logically, whereas most people are like, oh my God, is this light in the right place? Or am I this? Or did I forget to put a memory card in? Or that they're all over the place. And you seem so centered that the rest just kind of takes care of itself. Is that
yeah. And I think that's what I'm kind of encouraging people to dig into, which gear and technique and lighting, all that stuff's really good. But if you can combo that with the centeredness side, boom, it's crazy what can happen in that with people photography in particular. I think with other photography too. Like I remember John Sexton giving a talk about landscapes, and I got to talk to him afterwards. And this is a famous thing he said, but he says, I listen to the trees, and there's this one tree in Yosemite Valley. It's bent over and there's snow all around. And it's not, he doesn't listen to it in like a woo-woo new agey kind of way, but he really like listens to it. And you're like, wow, that tree is speaking to me. how is this possible? It's just a tree, but it's possible because he was grounded, centered, he was listening. He wasn't like, oh my gosh, awesome tree, snap. He probably like, knowing John, he like sat there for an hour, watched the snow fall. He was like listening to the poetry of the mountains and the stream and the snowflakes. And then it's, yeah, one little image, but it's much more than that. And so that's where, if we want to fill our frames with more, it's not the camera, it's not the lens, it's about what we're bringing to that whole equation. And I think it works in a lot of different types of photography as well. So.
Definitely. Well, we're going to sneak one more question
Yeah.
before we go on to part
Yeah.
3. Brian was asking about that picture. I think it's of a white wolf on your website, and I'll drop the
Yes.
link in the comment section for those of you who want to look at this image. Brian's asking, he says the animal does not appear to be shying away. It's very focused. How do you get that kind of control out of animals?
Yeah, well, that one, there was an animal handler there, and they had brought a wolf. It was this photo thing, and everyone was taking pictures with this really elaborate model and this elaborate set with the wolf. So it was sort of like this juxtaposition, fashiony thing, and it just didn't resonate with me. And so I went up to the handler. The wolf wasn't there with her, and I said, "Could I ever capture a portrait of the wolf?" And she's like, "Are you kidding? That would be amazing." So I figured out, she brought the wolf up on the back of like a U-Haul truck. It was like a grip truck, basically. The U-Haul doors open. That's my favorite kind of light, and basically covered shade. So you have something over the subject. They're in shadows looking towards light. And then she taught me what to do. She was next to the wolf. I started 30 feet away, really low, moved really slow. Eventually, I worked my way into the wolf's space. The wolf accepted me into his space. And then I was up really close to the wolf, and I had to move. I had to do all the stuff we're talking about with portraits, but with animals, it was like next level. And you're like in this moment, like you're connecting with this animal. And it's like, it is a gift, because you realize it's a wild animal that could just, it could turn away. And I would see it do this with other people. So I knew, I'm like, I want a portrait. I want, and then obviously made the connection. So that was this probably one of the most informative experiences for portraiture for me. And that's where I do still think working with animals and critters and creatures of all sorts, because I think we're all kind of wild animals at heart in a way. And we all get scared, nervous, and we react in different ways. And we all have space that we allow people into or not, or we put on our defenses or snarl or whatever it is. And so, yeah, that was a really amazing experience. And kind of a, and also maybe there was a photo. I had no idea if I got a photo, which is often the case for me, but I knew I had the gift of a connection. And so I, then left the wolf's space and went on to other things, but I was like, wow, that was a gift, and that changed me. And so in my portraiture, I'm also kind of looking for that little bit of, exchange, that wisdom, that gift. And I think, rather than thinking like, I want to nail this shot, I want to get the best wolf shot anyone's ever gotten, and then I can use it on stock or whatever, I don't know. And thinking about portraits isn't necessarily people. I think you could take a portrait of a tree. That's what John Sexton did. I think you could take a portrait of a leaf, of an apple, of a wolf. It's about intent, and it's about story. It's about that narrative. It's about revealing. It's about the withinness of something. I mean, Aristotle said the aim of art isn't outward expression, but inward significance. It's inward significance. And that's what makes photographs, to me, most interesting. And again, that's just me. If what makes photographs exciting to you is like, I don't know, dramatic light and brilliant colors, and that's fine. You need to channel that, and you need to go into that thing and bring that into your people photography. And a lot of people do, and it turns out amazing. I've tried that and it just falls short, right? So that's where that comes into play, is paying attention to yourself, and then diving in, to the experience of that connection. So should I jump? I'm gonna jump.
Yeah, jump.
I'll
Go for it.
I'm gonna jump. I'm sharing screen, guys, and just to do a couple more slides. And we could always, we don't have to get through all the slides, but I just like to have stuff. Posing is something I've avoided talking about most of my career, I think, really until this talk, because I don't like the idea of posing. I'll tell you why in a second. But here's like bad posing is something that's good, bad to good, bad to good. How do we do that? And here's the maybe notes or screenshot. Direct to connect, demonstrate, anchoring, intention, reset with movement. But I wanted to jump into this topic, and I wanted to do that because um, to kind of give you a few ideas, practical ideas on how you can pose your subjects. One is if you want poses which are more, let's say, well posed, like the people I turn to are people like Lindsay Adler, and her book on posing is amazing. And I've learned so much from that. Or there's a lot of other people that teach posing out there. But when it's more of, I'm gonna say like you want a well posed um, subject, that's what I'll do. But if you look at my pictures, they're not actually very well posed. No one ever says like, Chris, man, you're like amazing at posing. The separation of the arms from the body, or the way you had the tilt towards the back shoulder versus the front. I am doing all of that, but for me, what they tend to say is, hey, the connection's there and it's soulful and real and authentic and all that. So how do I do that? How do I pose with that in mind? One is direct to connect. So every time I'm directing a subject, I'm always thinking about connection. Connection is king. So if I'm using shoulders, I'm having fingers. My fingers are light. As far as my direction, I say pivot your shoulders. And even this motion and the rhythm and how rigid my hands are or how relaxed they are is going to help my subject put at ease. If I'm directing the face, again, this isn't to like bad talk other photographers, but I know some photographers will say, pretend my hand's a suction cup and I'm putting it on your face and then I'm tilting your head this, that. I would never say that to a subject because that's such an aggressive, I don't want a suction cup on my face. So what I would say is my hand, I would have a soft hand like this. And I would say, hey, if this is the tilt of your head, what if you follow kind of my hand and then I'll do it as well. So I'm mirroring. What if you tilt it this way? Or if I need eyes to go up, I'll just say like, hey, what if you look up towards the top of that curtain right there? If I need, shoulders to go this way, I say, well, what if you turn your feet and you kind of look out the window that's to the right over there? And then now, yeah, do that, take a breath, and then look back at the camera. And so I've posed them. I've gotten their shoulders where I want them to be, feet guide the shoulders, and then they're over there, take a picture where they get a break and then come back to it. So I will use techniques like that, but every directional technique that I'm giving, and I'm going to create a course on this topic, but it's always connection is the main goal. So nothing that's going to make them feel awkward, odd, strange, whatever. I'm trying to work through that. Or if it is odd and strange, I'll call it out. Like, this will feel really strange. So like maybe the artist one, like lean into the camera because you wouldn't naturally sit that way, which I had him do. But I'll say like, okay, he was like ready to do the picture. I'm like, trust me on this. It'll feel a little odd, but lean in and then look up. And he did that slight thing and it created the feeling. But I wouldn't just say lean in, look up, because then he's like, what the heck? Why am I leaning and looking up? Or, if you lean in too, so you get the idea. Connection. Next one, demonstrate. I'll trade positions with them because they often see the bad version of the scene and we see the good version. So if they're in front of this cool rustic wall, maybe there's like a broken down alley over here, which they're staring at. They don't know how cool it looks, the wall behind them. So I'll trade positions and I'll show them the pose or the posture that I want. So that's really important. Third one is anchoring. We know this from, public speaking. I don't have a little thing here, but if someone had, this is my wallet, but if they're giving a speech, a TEDx talk, and they have a clicker in their hand, they feel more comfortable than without it. If they have a podium, and even if they don't use it, they feel more comfortable. Or TED Talks, they have the red circle carpet. It makes you feel comfortable. You have space, you're anchored, you're grounded. So I use that in posing a ton. If we were to deconstruct my pictures, lean against this wall, put your hand on that thing, hold this object, do that, something that just anchors them. Those photos don't always make the final cut, but they help them feel connected and grounded themselves. They feel like they're doing something versus just kind of floating in space. Like, I don't know what to do with my hands and arms. And I'll be like, yeah, who does? Like, what if you just like put your arm on that little railing and lean against your face a little bit? And if they did this, that would be great. So that's my third one. Fourth one is intention, telling them why you're doing the movement. So if like the artist, like, I didn't say this to him, but if I said, trust me, lean forward, look up, because this is going to creates an image which has this, I think, language that would have made sense to him. This creates an image which feels really raw. He would like that word. He wouldn't like real or authentic. He would be like, come on, hoot. That's like sissy stuff. That, just knowing his vocabulary. But if I said, this looks really raw, he'd be like, yeah, man, raw. Because his art's really raw. He's full tattoos and, really rough, raw guy. So anyway, if I tell them that intention, then that helps. Or if it's the yoga teacher and I say, do this, and the intention is to get this sense of serenity. And by putting your hand in that way, it gives us this serenity and peace in this photograph. She's like, oh yeah, I'll do that. That feels right. And then the last one is to reset with movement. And what I mean by that is I'll have my subject walk out of the scene, like I told you, trade spots, then walk back in. And usually when they walk back in, the posing is better than anything I could have done. They'll just stand naturally a certain way, and then it looks natural and authentic because it really is. I haven't done anything, except if you just have them stand there and point a camera, then they're like, I don't know what to do. But if they walk into a scene, out of a scene, or just to a new location, or they're bored because you're getting something out of your camera bag, they'll cross their legs or their arm, and I'll be like, wait, hold that. And you got to catch it before they reset and perform for the camera. And that has given me, a large majority of my best poses. So that's the posing thing. I know we're kind of getting close to the end here a little bit, but let's take a couple questions if there are any from you, Derek.
Yeah.
Or from anyone else.
Yes. Make sure to get your questions in, everybody. Our first question is about posing and expressions. And, you talk a lot about, I don't know if you just do it, if it's just second nature, like, oh, well, when he has his head up and speaking about the artist, it gives this look, or if they do this, it gives this emotion. What is a good resource for people? I mean, say there's somebody who just says, look, I have no idea if I have them do this, if it's saying something about them that I don't intend for. Does that make sense? I'm like tripping over my words here. Like, how do you,
No, I get it. How do you find that, right? Yeah. And this goes back to sailing class in college, a little 14-foot boat. They have you flip the boat. And the reason they have you flip it is so if this is our little boat, you're kind of riding on an edge on the water, and at some point you get too far and you flip it over. Or if it's a guitar, that's maybe a better analogy. The way you tune a guitar is you go sharp, you go flat, you go sharp, you go flat, and you kind of go sharp, flat, sharp, flat, sharp, flat, and then you get, it's in tune. Photography and posing, I've found, at least my own method, is the same exact way. So you have to break it, and then you have to build it back, exaggerate it, break it, do these things, which leads to my next section. But more in more particular ways is the trouble with most of us photographers is we didn't go to photo school. We're self-taught, myself included. So what that means is we watch some video, here's the 3 poses, and we do that, and we're like, cool. But the uplook one, you have to try it maybe 4 ways. Like try it really subtle, like the camera height's right here. Now I'm going to reach out of camera, but do it right here, and then do it way up there. And I did this, on accident with a subject where I had this famous guy, but he was like looking up, and he just looked like so little and small and pleading, like it was almost like a, little like, please help me kind of look. I was just like, oh my gosh, I cannot believe I did that. But by flipping the boat, so to speak, you can find those things. So that's one way. Got to practice. I mean, that's not it's easier to follow the posing card and you get the good pose. So what I like to do is, yes, turn to that, but then also break it. See what happens if someone says, like, put all the weight on the back leg. That's a common thing in portraiture, or on one foot. Do that, but then literally lift the other foot off the ground. Find or put one on a step. Lift, or lean forward. Like at what point? Let's just see me for a second. What point will it fall apart if I'm leaning into the camera? Like that doesn't. I'm really feeling it for me. But if we're talking, and I probably did this without thinking about it. At some point I was like, there's a reflection moment. I did this or something, or, some kind of lean. So experiment, and then, Lindsay Adler will teach you a lot with the hands, you don't want to like this. You want it so it's almost like not even really leaning into it. This is too much. This is too little. This maybe, or this maybe is right. Again, I can't really see myself because the camera thing, but that's what I would try. And then, So that would be one thing, experiment. Second thing is really pay attention to how it feels to you. And this is the hard part, because you want, we all want like a rule, like the up look. I don't use that very much, but that particular artist, his raw, edgy energy and his vulnerability, it was the right moment, I think, for that. I also don't use really super low camera angles a lot, more hero, things and postures where people are long and tall and imposing and big. My camera height range is probably waist to little overhead, but that's just what I like in posture and posing wise. So anyway, let me think. I need a quick tip for someone who's like, how the heck do I pose? Well, here's what I would say for posing. Think about body and shoulders. If it's squared off, men or women, it's a little bit more stoic. Once it's turned, it's a little bit more, there's a little more something dynamic. With leans, you want any kind of lean or anchoring, less pressure is better. So if I lean against a wall and smash my arm into the wall, it looks awkward. But if I'm pretending I'm on a wall right now, if I'm just barely touching it, it looks better. Same thing sitting in a chair. If I plop down in this chair, it's not going to look good. If I come to the edge of it, I'm not even touching the back of my chair right now. I'm not like super overdone. Maybe right here. That would be fine. And I think this could be a good portrait of someone at a desk if I had a camera on the other side. And with their hands, how to experiment. You could have them come together. You could have, if the lean's too much, just find, again, have them do a bad lean. And sometimes you'll discover like, oh my gosh, that bad lean or that bad pose for this person in this situation will really work in another situation when it's aligned with their energy and the mood and the story and all that stuff. So that's how I tackle that one. But I'm creating a course on the topic because it is one of the secrets of the whole thing is how do we carry ourselves? But maybe just to distill it, this is more important than the actual movement, shoulders, all this kind of stuff, is you want them to feel the posture. They need to feel it. So who's the guy in Rain Man, the actor in Rain Man, not Tom Cruise, but
Dustin Hoffman.
Dustin Hoffman. Yeah. He says his advice to beginning actors is to never act in front of a mirror because it doesn't matter what it looks like. It only matters how it feels. And so I say the same thing in portrait. It doesn't matter what it looks like. I have plenty of horrible, horrible poses that feel so strong. They've, award-winning images. So always go with feeling over look. And that will carry, I think, you through that. All right. Wonderful. That was a little soapboxy, but that's how I feel about it. And I think too often what happens with my students, they rely on the pose. They're like, some of them are like, yeah, like, uplifting kind of look, and they'll have some pose, which is uplifting, but the person you can tell they're like, I can put my body here, but this is not me. And this is not working. So you got to connect the two, the interior, exterior, if you want authentic, natural, flowy kind of portraits. Now, if you're going for conceptual portraits, if you're going for more commercial vibe, then that's different. But today we're talking about authentic stuff.
Awesome. Can I sneak in a follow-up there from Maurice on that whole posing thing? Maurice is asking if you use props.
Yes, I use props. Except it's kind of funny, I think I even used the word props earlier, but I don't ever think of them as a prop. So they have to be relevant. So for example, if I'm photographing, which I've never done, a famous golfer, I would say, bring a club. You'd be like, really? I'm like, dude, just bring a club. And then I would have him swing the club, and I'd have him bounce the club, and I'd do all this stuff with the club. None of the club pictures would work or would be anything good, but it would be a prop which connects him or her to what he or she does in their craft and the way they move and operate in the world. So if there's something that can get them there, which is authentic to them, I would do that. So if there's someone, let's just say, I'm just trying to think of, let's go to the yoga teacher. I wouldn't bring a soccer ball, or I wouldn't bring even like a vintage lantern or something, unless I said, hey, I'm doing this shoot. It's about light, and it's about that, that one thing you did, it's related to light. And so I have this idea with this lantern. Do you think that could be interesting? And they may say, yeah, that does resonate. Then the lantern, the prop, comes into the frame. And sometimes what I'll do with props though is that, like, let's say the lantern, maybe they're holding it in their hand and you do one like this. And I'll say, well, just put it next to, hang it down at your arms. And then the real portrait happens. The lantern's not even in the shot, but it got them to the narrative. If that makes sense. So yeah, I use props, but I don't have like a trunk full of props.
So
You know what I mean?
you keep it natural. I mean, what I think is interesting, Chris, and listening to you talk is I think so many people, portrait photographers, go into a shoot thinking that every pose, every interaction, everything has to lean towards a getting a portrait out of it that is going to be usable. And I'm hearing
Yes.
some of your techniques are, it's interesting because it's like, it's almost like you know where the end point is, and
Yeah.
it's almost like there's a couple portraits like, hey, I know this is a throwaway right here, but it's part of
Yeah.
the greater good of getting to where I need to get.
Yes. 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 And even the throwaways may be keepers for the sake of, say, commerce, because I'll do like, let's just say, I'm going to go to the astronaut thing because we talked about that one. Let's say that kind of a classic astronaut shot. I do have one. He's like in the space station thing, and it's like very like Wired magazine. You know what I mean? It's like I don't even know how to explain it. So I have that one, but then I also have a more thoughtful, reflective one, which I like more. So I'll do both. So it is a both and. Sometimes I'll throw away the other shot, or maybe it's just for someone else or some other purpose. Let's go to the fashiony thing. Like I did the kind of the lookbook shoot. I did lookbook. Those photos turned out really, really well. I'm super proud of them. But in there, I also have a couple portraits, which I'll actually use. The other stuff I probably won't, because it's more for them and for the lookbook. So it is, having that both and approach, that vision, that and that ability to just kind of shoot through it. Like I'm trying to think of let's just go to skiing because it's winter time right now. It's like do a couple runs, down the slopes, and you don't have to like do your biggest tricks or airs or moves or impress anyone, but just throwaway is probably the wrong term. Warm up is kind of the wrong term too, but it's somewhere in that realm of like, yeah, just like let's see what happens. Because it's a little more exploratory. It's a little more like excavation, I guess, for me, than it is like a warm up. Like, this is just a warm up, but it's like you're digging, and then sometimes you're like, oh wait, that surfaced. Okay, I had no idea. There's a surprise. And then one of my editors for the books that I write, Ted, always says, if there's no surprise for the reader, or there's no surprise for the writer, there's no surprise for the reader. Because I would tell him, I'm like, Ted, I have no idea where this chapter is going. He'd say, great, keep going, Chris, keep going. And so I remember that his words when I'm shooting too, like, I have no idea if this golf club idea is any good at all. And I hear Ted saying, keep going, Chris, keep going, wait, look for the surprise. And then when I see it, I'm like, oh, yes, capture that. There's that ebb, there's that moment, and then let go of it, and then keep going. Then, search for what's next. So.
Awesome. We have another
Yeah.
question. I don't know if it's just like you got me so wrapped up in this. I'm like, is there more slides coming? Should I hold off on the questions?
Yeah. No, we can do either way. Let's do another question.
Yeah,
All the
definitely.
slides
So
aren't even necessarily important, but keep going. Yeah.
Winsome on YouTube, welcome Winsome, says, how do you make someone who is self-professed at bad at taking pictures feel more comfortable and look more relaxed in a photo shoot?
Yeah, those are my favorite people. And I think, and we talked about this a little bit before, but just to say it again, is when they say it, that's a moment of vulnerability, and inside you celebrate. You put your arms up. You're like, yes. It's because someone's saying like, oh, I'm more comfortable behind the camera, or it's so hard for me to have someone take my picture, or, I don't know, whatever they say about not being comfortable, that is your moment to respond and to be vulnerable as well. And to say, I am so with you. It is so hard to do this, especially a shoot like this, where you're trying to be the public face of this big company. Your company's about to go public. Everything's on the line. Everyone really cares about this. I get it. But let me tell you this. In that context, we're going to create 3 different kinds of photos. One, which is like bold, strong, forward facing. We'll get that. Another one is you're a mom, you have kids. So I want to do something that's a little bit warmer, little bit kinder, and another one just in the environment showing you in front of this huge office complex that you own or something. I'm making all this stuff up. But once I do that, one, there's empathy, there's connection, a little bit of vulnerability, then there's a strategy. That CEO or company owner or whatever is like, game on, let's do it. Like we're good to go. So that's kind of how I tackle that is in that kind of situation. It's not always that long of a narrative. If it's like someone's like, oh, I'm not comfortable with it, I can be like, yeah, I get it. But you know what? You look great. And this portrait's going to be, or maybe let me just go with something. Let's say I was photographing someone who was possibly had some skin cancer and was really worried about it possibly going really, really bad. But wanted to have photos for her family before and everything. And so she didn't look good. Right. So I can't be like, well, you look great. It's more, I get that this is really difficult. And I just have so much respect for you for wanting to do this. And I think it's meaningful to do this. So I think that we can create something meaningful. So, finding some way to like pivot it versus just be like, belittle it or force them into a posture, which is beautiful or sexy or handsome or strong, which they're not feeling. I guess what I want in my portraits is I don't want them to I want them to recognize themselves in the images. And I want people who care for the people I'm photographing to like the photos. So it's not an over idealized fake image that isn't true. And I don't know how to explain that, but if anyone maybe who's had like glamour photos done or something where you're like, wow, that's not me, but that's like interesting picture. Those are great. Those are fine, but those just aren't my jam. And so I want to someone who says they don't look good. I don't want to like make them look amazing and figure out ways to do, but I want to be true to who they are. I want them to be comfortable. And I guess part of it is I think imperfection is incredibly beautiful. And so I think insecurity is beautiful. I am, because that's essentially what it is. It's like, I'm not comfortable. So you're insecure. There's a lack of comfort in something. And then showing them how I truly see them, which is past the surface. And a lot of times people will say to me, that was a gift. Like, thank you. Like that was an important part of my journey and self-understanding or something, not that you get that all the time, but yeah, that's what I want, that psychological component and that meaning there. And there are times where they'll look at their pictures and they don't like them because of what's there. I'll think of one shoot where it was real authentic and everything. And the guy came back and he was like, you know what? He saw the photos. He's like, obviously, photographically, these are amazing. But it really made me realize, and he kind of went into this whole thing on self-care and sleep. And it made him look in the mirror and realize he wanted to adjust his life. And then we did another shoot a few months later. So I think that's okay too, versus if I had, I don't know, like over smoothed the skin, or he had kind of dark circles under his eyes. If I had like over retouched those, he wouldn't have liked the pictures either. And so, yeah, that's how I would tackle that. But Winsome, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, but awesome question. That is the question of questions, because the reality is, it is an uncomfortable thing to have your portrait made because it causes you to reflect on who you are, where you are, life, passage of time, self-image, self-awareness, identity, everything else, and it all happens in a split second. Even as simple as, someone points a camera at you and you're like, oh my gosh, how does my hair look? Or, oh my gosh, my brother used to always say this about my ears. Do my ears look big? Wait, and you kind of, stuff floods back to you. And so I see that as an opportunity to engage with that content that floods back and not be afraid of it. Can I go a little Zen on you, Derek? A little Zen here?
Of course.
Thich Nhat Hanh, one of my favorite teachers, he writes about anger, and he says anger this is classic, he says, anger is like a potato. If you bite it, it's just bitter. It isn't very good. But if you make a fire, boil some water, boil the potato, it can become a nutritious part of the meal. So basically you sit with it, you get curious about it. You say, well, what is this? Why is this? Where does this come from? So same kind of thing. If someone says I'm uncomfortable, there are moments where I will say like, well, tell me about that, and they're like, and they'll go into a story about something or about, and I'm not trying to get too strangely like emotionally deep here, but like, oh, I was in an abusive relationship and this happened or something, or you never know where that's coming from, or it just might be like, oh, I just don't feel like I'm photogenic. It's like, yeah, I get that. I'm not either. And so I'm not saying you always have to go super, super deep, but it's scalable. But I do like that idea of the baked potato. You don't want to, when someone hands you the baked potato, it's not anger, but it's, like it's vulnerability. You don't want to like throw it on the ground and step on it or hide it or something. You just say like, yeah, get that. But the good news is this is my specialty and we're going to create something great. So, work with them.
I kind of want to run in the direction where we were going, kind of piggybacking off of Winsome's question there. Bernard, who's joining us on Zoom, is asking about how do you get the person to show you their inner self versus what they want you to see? Do you have to become like a human lie detector or know when you've really tapped in?
Yes, because we all project. I mean, even now I'm projecting certain things that I want you guys to see. My cabin, I set things out and I have a light here and I picked out a sweater, you know what I mean? All these things. So I'm projecting a certain thing in a way that isn't necessarily bad. It's how we operate as humans, right? We're bringing something forward and we have this, what I'm going to say is energy, which like goes out. There is that internal interior side of who we are and who people are. So what I do is I shoot through the exterior stuff. Like if someone, let's just say it's a guy I was photographing for like this tattoo brand, and this one guy just wanted to be really tough, and he was like, everything was just so like his shoulders and his movements were just really, it was like rigid and strong and kind of this like thing. And that's what he wanted to project. And so I couldn't say like, hey man, like, why don't you like let go of all that tension in your shoulders? So I shoot through that. And then I would be like, okay, so obviously you do a ton of fitness stuff. Like, what do you do? He's like, oh man, this. And he talked about his exercise he does. And he was like, I'm like, dude, that is sick. Like, and then we talked about that and got that. And then eventually, so obviously I'm mirroring him. You could tell by the way I asked him. I asked about I didn't say like, excuse me, sir, what kind of yoga exercises do you do? Or I'm like, oh bro, like what do you like, I'm moving like this because he's moving like this. And I'm like, yeah. And like, and I was like, dude, that's great. And if I knuckle punch him, I'm like, boom, dude, that was a great shot. And then I'm working there. And then eventually when I get there, I'm like, okay, great. And then when I get something like, what matters most to you? He's like, oh bro, for me, it's like family, like my dad's like my closest friend. I'm like, yes. I'm like, okay. And then I'm like, okay, let's do a photo. Like close your eyes, think about your dad. He's like, yeah, and I come back, and then he comes back, and I get the portrait, right? And so you saw how that unfolds, which to him, and I think to a bystander, often feels like Chris has no clue what he's doing. He's just like talking with these people, and sometimes clients or bystanders are like, I don't think he got the shot because he's like talking to this guy about lifting weights and whatever. But for me, it's part of the strategy, mirroring, noticing, finding the rhythm, and then it's often when it comes to the internal side of who we are, it's more about like nudging than it is about like doing a 180. And what I mean by that is like, let's say I'm pretty happy right now. I'm very happy. But if there are dark parts of my life and things I reflect on that are sad and tragic and gone through a lot of things like that, if you for some reason wanted a photo more of like that, we might start talking happy and wow, you live in Santa Barbara and you do all this outdoor stuff and that's great and everything. And obviously living there, you were really close to that mudslide that happened a few years ago. And I'd be like, yeah. And then you say, well, what was that like? And I would say, that was super heavy. And then you might say, well, did it impact you guys in any specific ways? And I'd say, yeah, my daughter's friend in 5th grade died, and you get where, that came from sunny, happy Santa Barbara surfer to something like that, and then you might take a portrait, and it's not that you have no idea that's my story, and you're delicate with like that excavation, almost like, like a dinosaur bones. You're like lifting them up. You're not like, oh, let's just crank into this and mudslide and tragedy. But then, and there would be the peak of the sadness with that, and you'd say that's really heavy, and that maybe affect you in a heavy way. It seems like, and this is where I would kind of guess I'm suggesting to the person, it seems like that shaped you. Yeah, it shaped me a lot. He's like, can I take a portrait with that in mind? Yeah, it would probably be helpful for me to do that, and then I'd take a breath and I'd look at the camera, and then there would be that portrait. And again, whatever your subject is. So I think thinking about it all goes back to the stuff we talked about: building bridges, nonverbal cues, mirroring, trust, evoking emotion. What's the narrative? Remember the queen died, the king died of heartbreak, the little subtle half thing, and directing in a way, posing, movement, eye contact, all those kind of things. And then getting the photo and then letting it go versus like, well, tell me who else you knew that died from that mud flow. If you had asked me that, I'd be like, bro, I can't, let's keep walking. I'm not ready for that. Right. Cause there's only so much delving I'm ready to do on someone maybe I just met and we're doing a photo thing. And I'm making all of this up, trying to flip the role, but I will have people photograph me so that I know what it's like. So anytime I have a photographer friend, I'll ask them, hey, will you take my picture? I've been photographed by, I could name 10 world famous photographers, from Mark Seliger to whoever, because I want to understand what it's like to be on the other side of their lens, to be in the hot seat, to be self-conscious, and to do that. So that's another thing I encourage people to do, is have your own portrait taken, because all portrait photographers will tell you, I'm more comfortable with the camera in hand. It's like, of course. I mean, it's kind of like, I'm more comfortable eating food than not eating food. Yeah. I mean, it's like, duh, but you have to be willing to, or maybe it's more like a dentist. Like, you have to be willing to be the dentist who has your own dental work done, so what it's like to be in that seat, and you're like, wow, like that was hard, or that was really good. Or what I learned from people who photograph me, like Mark Seliger, just because I threw his name out, is he has this way of really, really making you trust him and feel comfortable like I've never experienced with any other photographer, I think. And you really feel this sense of, like, even though he was like this great photographer, he just like, boom, came to my level. We were level, eye, shoulder kind of thing. And so that obviously stuck with me, and I try to do the same. I've had other photographers that kind of belittle you. They're like, oh, do this, do that. And then I'm just like, oh my gosh, like that photo shoot was, or not photo shoot, that portrait session was horrible. Like, that was the most horrible thing I've experienced. Or like, they suction cup my face. I'm like, I don't want a suction cup on my face. So therefore, I'm not going to do that to other people. So if anyone watching wants to get better, have your own portrait taken. Anyone, iPhone or whatever camera it can do, but just so you don't lose touch with the experience of it, because that's the way you can maintain the empathy with your own subjects.
Wonderful.
Right. Yeah.
Chris,
It would be like, because we talked about tattoos, it would be like a tattoo artist that never got a tattoo. There's a lot of portrait photographers out there and like that. And I'll tell them like, well, we need to do this. And they're like, no, I can't do that. And I'm like, you got to do that. Like, let's do it right now, So
now,
anyway.
when you sit for Mark, I'm kind of curious about this. Is it,
Yeah.
how they say with certain things, like it's easier to take somebody who doesn't know anything and kind of teach them
Yeah.
what you want than to try to get somebody to unlearn what they already know and see it their way. When you're sitting for Mark Seliger, is it something
Yeah.
where, like, don't you have like your process baked into your mind, and now you kind of have to throw it out and do him
Totally.
things?
Yes. And whoever it is, I mean, all kinds of, famous and non-famous photographers I've done this with, because as a teacher, I'll hang out with these people and be like, hey, will you take my picture? And every time I have to be like, okay, you have to surrender. I think that's what you're getting at. In order to have a great artist collaboration, and this goes back to our tattoo conversation, which was, um, uh, we were talking about how you can hire artists to do what they're good at and kind of get out of the way. And so in a portrait session, I think that's part of it. You have to be like, okay, like let's do this. Like, what do you want to do? Like, how do and that has helped me realize that my portrait subjects also have to do that with me as well, which is maybe they want like the big strong thing and they're like, okay, they're going to have to let go of that. But I have to help them let go of that. Does that make sense? So yeah, that's one of the big lessons I've learned and I've learned that from photographing. Like I photographed Steve McCurry once, and he's the National Geographic guy, Afghan girl photograph. And it was funny. I was like set up to take a portrait of him, just natural light outdoors, like most of my stuff. And he was like, oh, no, 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 no. Like you move over here and I'm going to be right here. And he kind of took over. And I was like, wow, this is kind of an interesting little masterclass from him on how he knows how the camera sees, even though he's the subject. And it was this cool little gift. So anyway, I guess what I'm saying with all this, anytime you can geek or nerd out with other photographers related to your type of craft, do it. Same thing I would do if I was in a landscape with Chris Burkhardt. I would be like, Chris, teach me how to see this landscape. And he would be like, okay, first of all, Orwig, you have the wrong lens on. Second of all, do you notice that? No, I don't. What about this? No. Okay. And then you kind of surrender to helping you see the world in a way. So yeah, so that's a good part of that process. And I know I'm going on here, but one person, a good friend, Elizabeth Messina, she took some photos of me, and she had me sit some way, and she's a famous wedding photographer. And I was like, well, what about the light in my eyes? And she's like, oh, I don't really care about light in the eyes. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's all I care about. And I never knew I cared about it until she said that. She's more into posture and feeling and mood and all those things. So it's a great learning opportunity by doing something with people who are a little bit different than you. Same thing I could say if people are like, well, I don't know any photographers. Well, maybe family photography, or maybe get a headshot. Pay someone to do your headshot. See how that feels. See what it's like. Pay someone to do a new artist portrait of you for your website or Instagram profile. Go through the pain and agony of figuring out, what do I wear? How do I show up? How long does it take? How long does it take to get the images and all of that? It builds a lot of empathy into the process.
Wow. Well, if I can sneak, I know you've been so gracious in letting us go over time here, but I wanted to sneak another question in from Larissa joining us on YouTube, asking about the amount of time that you spend. I thought this question was interesting because we did talk so much about the preparation and how you set a session up. So can you tell us a little bit about that, like how much time you take, and do you break down what the person should expect from the session?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. So thank you, Larissa, if I'm saying that correctly. I am very conversational, obviously. I mean, I think everyone's kind of picking up on that vibe. I think gives me a good opportunity to say that there are times when I'm not conversational at all, and I'm very quiet. I'm an introvert and all that. So, because have you ever met someone who's very conversational, and they're very nice, but they're almost like too nice, and they like talk about everything, and you're just like, oh my gosh, just shut up. Like, I just want to get my coffee cup. I don't want to like talk about like, the thread count of my sweater and what kind of razor I use for my beard. Like I don't like, it's just too much. So I'm always looking for the cues for when the person has had enough, if that makes sense. Maybe I have one friend, like we all have a certain amount of words we use a day. We all have a rhythm of speech. We all have a certain amount of explanation that we need. When I photographed Yvon Chouinard, the founder of Patagonia, he was like, okay, let's get this over with as soon as possible. So he flat out said, like, I want this fast. I want this done. Let's do this. Go. And so I'm not going to say like, yeah, Yvon, like, well, tell me about what it was like in 1984, So I then have my marching orders, and I'm not going to explain a lot, but I'm still going to say, okay, Yvon, here, I want to do this. We're going to stand in the open doorway. This light looks great here. You stand that way. So I've now matched my rhythm to his. And then I asked him about, I need to know, I know environment's really important to you. Why is it? He gave me his response. It was a very angry response about kids going blind because they didn't have access to clean water. And I'm like, okay. And I took a portrait, and it's this real defiant, strong image. And then the shoot's over. So in that case, I didn't explain a lot to him. I matched the rhythm. I still got a question in. I feel like I honored his time, and we were done. It's one of my all-time favorite portraits. With other people, if they're a little bit nervous and like, hey, we're going to do a walk, it's going to take 30 minutes. We'll go to like 3 or 4 locations. We're going to do 2 or 3 looks. I will give that. The more you can let them know what is going to happen, the better. Back to that CEO I was talking about. I'm going to do 3 photos. One that's forward facing, kind of headshotty, one that's a little warmer, one that's environmental portrait. Once she knows that's the marching orders, boom, 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 done, she can give me the time to achieve that. But if I just say, hey, we're going to kind of shoot, and my style is kind of conversational, and I want to talk about what's important to you, she's like, oh my gosh, like I am stuck with this. I mean, nice, but not mirroring or matching what I need to do and get done. So short answer to your question is it depends every time. And it goes back to all the stuff we said before. Some people are really interested in photography. And so I will tell them, even like, I'll talk settings, I'll talk light, I'll talk reflected light. I'll say, look, we're in this building here. That white building is bringing this light back in your eyes. And I'll step in, I'll say, look at my eyes here, and then look at them here. And they'll be like, oh my gosh. I'm like, yeah, do you see all those little sparkles? That's from the white building and the sky and the clouds. And I say, you stand there, and they're like, oh yeah. But other people, they don't care at all about that. They just need me to do what I need to do and be done. Or they need to talk about their exercise, where they're lifting weights that morning at the gym. And even though their eyes are sparkling, I'm not going to disclose that. So I'm trying to be pretty careful on matching what I feel. And I could be wrong, with like what questions I ask, or if I ask something that's too personal. Like I said, even the tattoo question, like, tell me about your tattoo. Oh, it's nothing. Or you might say like, oh, it seemed, this one person I photographed, his mom had MS, and I said, oh, that must have been really hard. And he then got emotional as a response to that. And he afterwards, that was okay with him, but that might have not been okay. Maybe sometimes, you get the cues where someone says, let's say my mom has MS. My mom has MS. And you're like, got it. Move to a new topic. I'm not going to be like, well, what was that like? I'm not going to match that rhythm, like that must be really hard for you, because they're machine gunning that statement. There's anger. Or they may say, my mom has MS. And then I would go, I don't even know what to say. You're like, yeah, there isn't a lot to say. And then you might lead to either not picture or picture, right? So Larissa, amazing question. Back to all that other stuff. Mirror, build trust, even the posing, think about how all that is, and that you're directing for connection, that you're anchoring them. Like sometimes people also, when they're in the process of being vulnerable, if they're in an open space, because I don't shoot in a studio very much, and someone walks by when they're sharing something that is meaningful to them, that kind of, they're like, I don't want people to be like, hear me talking about, I don't feel comfortable being photographed. So I'm thinking about the location, I'm thinking about the light, I'm thinking about the temperature, all those things, coming together to kind of put them at ease. Like back to my yoga teacher shoot a couple of days ago, it was really cold out. And so we were shooting in open shade, but then every time I took a break, I would take a break. I said, wait, come step in the sun, get warmed up. And then she would get warmed up. And so be like, okay, go back in, and then come back out. And paying attention to temperature is huge, right? And hydration and all those kind of things, because as photographers, we're so locked into, this is awesome. Like imagine whoever's listening, just seen some names, Danny or Courtney, or whoever is like, if it's your favorite celebrity, you are so excited. You could do this for 4 hours. They could only last 10 minutes. So and because of the temperature, because of their agenda, because of time, because of interest, who knows what. And so that also goes back to being photographed, because let's say you hire someone to photograph you. Let's say I hire someone. I need, which I do. I need new photos for my website, and you say, okay, Chris, let's do that. It'll be 4 hours. When do you have 4 hours free? I would be like, oh my gosh, like there's no way I would ever do a 4 hour photo shoot ever. If you told me 20 minutes, maybe I would do it. But if you told me an hour and a half, I'm like, I couldn't handle that. So just keeping in mind everyone's cadence, and all those other things as well, in regards to their own internal clocks. Do they have kids? Do they have work responsibilities? I mean, I'm talking about anyone. Like famous people have work responsibilities, have to pick up their kids from school. Non-famous people do, or sometimes there's just there are activities which become uninteresting if we do them for too long. And photography is definitely one of those. If you overshoot someone with someone, there can be a point where you're just dragging it out and you need to, wrap it up. So great question. Great question.
A lot of read the room kind of advice.
Yeah. Which is, isn't it funny? It's kind of like obvious. Sometimes I feel like all this stuff, it's like, oh yeah, be a good human, be thoughtful, read the room, take some pictures. That's like in a way all that I do. But I think the alchemy of it all is when you combine all those things with the technique and craft of photography and that art side. And maybe, I know we're getting near the end, but my vision of it, it's this way, Derek. I'm like tree and roots. The tree is the picture, or the fruit maybe on the tree, the apple, the peach, whatever. It's like, that's the picture. It's beautiful. It's amazing. It's interesting. The branches, your growth, your gear, and all that stuff's out there. But the roots are what really feed the whole thing. But you can't just have roots. You also can't just have treetop, so it's like two. And when I see my students be like, I'm going to work on both sides of those things, they all of a sudden, some of them literally become like world famous, or go from being a professional something to a professional photographer. It's like, that's a transitional moment, is two sides, both connected, both valuable. One isn't better than the other. This isn't woo woo. This isn't like artsy fartsy. This is real. And this is also true to who I am as a person. And when all that aligns, then you're like, yeah, this is amazing. And other people are like, yeah, that was amazing. You say, yeah, and get to do more of it. So
That's awesome, man. I mean, I'll say this. I was pretty set in my ways as a photographer and even as a portrait photographer. And the more I'm listening to you, I'm sitting here as you're talking, questioning even my own process and looking for opportunities where I can take a little bit of what you do in your work and say, you know what, that really, there was some stuff that's like I never even thought about, or maybe I had a different approach in the way I'm doing things. And now I'm looking at it and I'm like, you know what, that sounds like it makes a lot more sense. But because, I would never think of it, or if I thought of it, then I'm going to question myself. But hearing you say it, and I'm like, all right, well, it definitely works for Chris and his process. So it's a lot you left on the table, man. This is how I know, Chris, the mark of a great talk, lecture, webinar, workshop, whatever you want to call it, is when I get a certain amount of information, but then it opens up a whole new Pandora's box of more questions. It's like for every gem you dropped, it's like you really got me thinking about the process as a whole in a different way. So
yeah, and I would just add to that little thing is the cool thing about this method, if people are like still listening and still into it, is that it's something you can kind of employ, so to speak. So let's say you do headshots, you do commercial portraiture, you do lifestyle photography, you do fashion photography, and maybe authentic portraits. So these could be 5 different realms that you like, or hats that you wear. One moment you're operating like a journalist. Great. One moment you're creating like this really forward-facing, strong headshot. Then you dip into your authentic portrait kind of mode. So I see it's like a yes and, it's like a both and approach versus, and I do that too. It's like there's sometimes where I need to get the shot that's, let's say, more like a headshot, and headshots aren't authentic. And this could be Pandora's box, but their whole point is commerce. You have a headshot because you want to get a gig, you want to get a job, you want a real estate agent, actor, whatever it is. So, but if someone dies, they never put up their headshot at the memorial service. They put up the portrait, and that's what I want to get. Um, I want to get one that family loves, that they love, that's, you know, all that kind of stuff. It's not that one's better or worse, it's just different. So if I'm going to do a headshot, I'm going to do a headshot and an authentic portrait. If they want a headshot and a fashiony influencer lifestyle thing, I'll get that too. And authentic portrait, I'll do that as well. And you could keep layering that up. So the cool thing about this, at least in my opinion, and this is what I encourage people to think about, is you don't think of this as like replacing the way you work, or this is the only way that you work. But this is another modality, another strategy, another kind of hat you can wear that when you need to tap into it, holy cow, it can lead to the most amazing results. But what happens to a lot of my students is they'll have an opportunity, let's say celebrity or family photo or whatever it is, or influencer, and they'll get the shot, which is like the idea of the person, back to Kelly Slater's words, versus the person. And I'm like, that's great, but if only you had both, you know? And when they start to do both, then it's like, okay, this is kicking. And then you can turn it on when you need to, you know, like kind of tap into that muscle group, so to speak, when you need to, and not use it when you don't. Because sometimes it's like, you just need to get the job done. And there's a very specific requirement for the photo, and great, do it, you know?
Yeah, there you go. You open Pandora's box, and now I'm like, I just got to shut my brain off, because the more I think and the more I want to respond, it's like, I have you here all day.
Yeah.
Now,
You know, I mean, I know we're over time. Should we cap it off, or should I do any more slides? I'm happy to cap it off. Because
look,
we're
if you're asking me, if you got a couple more minutes and you have some more information, every time I feel like every time you put a slide up or open your mouth, you're dropping gems. So
Yeah. Let's do it. Let's do it. And then
go for it.
here goes. Here goes. Here goes. And the reason why, because we're kind of getting to like, how do we implement all this stuff? I'm gonna skip the little client part, because that's for another day. But build skill and portfolio. So here are the assignments. If people are like, hey, this is interesting, I want to explore how I can do more of this, I have 3 little mini assignments for you. The first one I call compose and recompose. So here's the first shot, and then here's the second shot. What I want you to go out and do is think about flipping the sailboat. I want you to go out and shoot something where you're like, this just feels great. And then say, I'm going to do the work of a photographer. So I want you to do that from a framing perspective. I also want you to do that from a lighting perspective. This is, 30 seconds apart. It's compose and then recompose. Here's one kind of light. Here's another kind of light. And really think about like the tuning the guitar, maybe is a better analogy. Go sharp or go flat, go sharp, find the sweet spot. So that really is assignment number 1. Number 2 is to photograph your friends doing what you love. So figure out a way to connect with people that you connect with, whether it's climbing or camping or whatever it is, and capture people in those elements. And by doing that, you're going to bring the camera into your natural, authentic environment, and it's going to help you capture natural, authentic images, because you already naturally connect with these people and these activities. Number 3 is really develop a light repertoire. So this kind of light here, one of these images was captured in downtown Santa Barbara. One of them was captured on the Brooklyn Bridge. They're both really the same exact kind of light. It's basically open shade with a light background, and I'm overexposing for this. I can create this light anywhere in the world. This is also the same exact kind of light. These were captured in different states, different times of day. And in the one on the left, you can see that catch light's an open door. And the one on the right, you can see the top of the open, it was like the top of the sky above a fence. This is that same kind of light. This is called covered shade. And there's some other examples of this captured in different places. And so I know what an image will look like, and I know where I can find light any part of the world. This is an image captured a couple days ago. This is backlight. That's another thing that I use a lot of. And I know how backlight works. I know how I can do it very subtle. I can know how I can use it to overwhelm an image and really create an ethereal look. I know how I can use it so you can kind of see the sun, or how you can really see the sun and the qualities that it allows you to capture and create. So with all of that, and again, there's other types of light that you can use, but I really, really encourage people to think about, okay, what kind of light is this, and how can I then use this regardless of where I am, time of day, location, part of the world, all that stuff. And to think about light is something that you can lean into and really learn and learn and learn and learn and learn, but have this like repertoire, like, oh, I'm going to do these 4 shots with these 4 kinds of light. Boom, here goes. And then my last little thing I forgot, I do have this little link and discount code for training for my book for anyone who's interested in all of that. And then I'll stop sharing this. That's learn.chrisorg.com/bhphoto. And I'll stop sharing that just so we can come back to the human side of it and the face-to-face side of it, which is, if you want to get better, if anyone wants to get better at something, you have to practice. And what I find the practice is the 3 things I was saying. The compose and recompose is like you have to kind of break something to fix it, to find the fixing point. You have to go flat and sharp. That's something that's really essential. You have to photograph who you are, where you are right now. So it's easy to like hire a model. That's not going to get you better. You got to photograph your brother, your best friend, your mom, your dad. You got to photograph the activities that you love. Start there and then grow from that point. And then the last thing is, rather than seeing natural light is just like, well, it's like kind of, it's all over the place and it's always different. Say like, no, really, the way that I use natural light, I can break it up into 5 or 6 different groups, which will give me 5 or 6 different looks consistently every time in every situation. So I know it's almost like a painter with their palette. Like, this is something I can reach for, versus like, oh, I'm just kind of walking around, like sort of hoping that, maybe that'll work. But instead I have that intention there. And that's what I encourage you to develop. So those are the last ones, Derek, the last little bit, last little nudge. Get out and practice, have some fun with it, and do it in a way that's true to who you are. So that's a good summary, I think. Good
Wonderful.
ending.
That's, I don't even want to ruin it. I don't even want to talk. I'm like, you wrapped it up with a nice little bow on it there. So, Chris, I want to thank you, man. This was great. I want to thank you for your time, your expertise, your experience, your knowledge, all of that. It's just really, really great vibes. Pleasure having you on. And I know everybody who's out there watching and listening got a ton of information out of this. So I want to thank you. I want to thank Sony for sponsoring this 2-part series. And make sure you guys go definitely check out chrisorwig.com, Chris Orwig on Instagram. Just Google Chris Orwig. Everything will come up there. But huge thank you to you, Chris, to Sony, to all of our viewers out there watching. Of course, can't do it without you guys. This is why we're on here doing this live. So thank you to you guys. Chris, any closing words?
That's it, Derek. Thanks a ton. Appreciate it. And appreciate all you for listening and tuning in, and have a great rest of the day.
I second that. Everybody have a wonderful afternoon or evening, no matter where you're watching us from. It's all we got for now. Another edition of the B&H Virtual Event Space is in the books.